Thank you for joining us so much. You have one of the most intriguing jobs in the cybersecurity space in Washington with the new Cybersecurity Directorate. So let's dive right into it. I know the Cybersecurity Directorate has 4 main areas of concentration. What are they?
Absolutely. So first, it's wonderful to be here. It's just wonderful to be a part of this conference and looking at all the fantastic speakers, see many of our partners across the US government who've spoken before, so it's really great to be a part of that. So our 4 key priority areas. First, it's really, NSA traditionally has what we call our keys and codes mission. We build the cryptography that underpins all of the Department of Defense as well as secure government communications. That traditional mission, it includes securing nuclear command and control, weapon systems, really rebuilding and modernizing that mission in an era where there's really rapid advances in technology, rapid advances in cryptography. We saw some of the Google announcements on quantum computing recently, particular significance there. So rebuilding that mission and putting a focus on it. I'm happy to talk more about that and give some statistics on what that looks like. Second, integrating cyber threat intelligence, cybersecurity engineering, and cybersecurity operations together to rapidly share threat information in an unclassified manner. The threat's in an unclassified space, defenders are fighting it in unclassified space, and we need to ensure that the insights we bring from that integration of mission, threat intel, operations, engineering, is done in that integrated way. And then finally, NSA for many, many years has played a key role in security standards and in new security technologies, and putting a focus on that as there's a host of technologies that will reshape the way we need to look at security, from 5G, Internet of Things, distributed ledger. So really working on those standards and thinking carefully about what is the level of security assurance needed for the different kinds of users. Clearly, if one of the services wants to use distributed ledger to understand its supply chain, there's a different level of assurance needed than if you and I want to just use Bitcoin to buy something.
So there's a lot there, and I want to dive into all of it. First, you talked about the keys and the codes. Can you explain how the cryptography work at the NSA actually does fit into the cybersecurity mission? I don't think that gets talked a lot about, and I'm wondering how that all fits together.
Really fascinating question you ask. I've been at the agency for 10 years, and when I learned more about this mission in the last year, it was really eye-opening to me, to your point, to see how little is known about it. So NSA builds a little bit over 1 million keys a year that's used to secure, as I noted, nuclear command and control, weapons command and control. It is the underpinning cryptographic, both control in terms of the communications themselves, as well as the identity and authentication. To give you an example, once a year, for example, we send new key out for particular platforms across the Air Force. And that ensures that those individuals have secure communications and that it's continuously refreshed. There's a great deal of modernization that we're planning to do in that space, particularly exciting, both because of advances in cryptography as well as advances in being able to push updates remotely that we're excited about doing.
And one of the goals that you stated was rapidly sharing improved threat intelligence. How are you looking to improve that process?
So we've gotten a lot of feedback. My colleague at DHS, Chris Krebs, has noted, given the degree to which adversaries in many cases are compromising existing infrastructure, pursuing their operation, whether it's for exploitation of intellectual property, whether it's for a different reason, and then moving on. And as a result, when we work to declassify and share indicators of compromise, pretty much they have a ticking time clock of how useful they are, and they expire very, very quickly. So what's more useful is if we can share tradecraft that we see adversaries using. So for example, quickly and in an unclassified way. So for example, you saw earlier this week, we released a dual seal report with the UK's NCSC regarding furlough's use of infrastructure, essentially co-opting infrastructure in order to execute their own operations. First, it was a good example of why attribution is hard in cyber, but it also gave a way to say, here's the broader actors. These are actors that are understood across the cybersecurity industry. Here's what they're doing, and then here are some practical IOCs that one can use to actually identify this activity, pursue it, and mitigate it. So working both giving the strategic context as well as the way to identify and mitigate that activity, and doing it quickly and in an unclassified way is an example of what we're seeking to do.
So that unclassified part, let's concentrate on that for a minute. Obviously, to publicly share some of these IOCs, there is a declassification process. What is the process in place to declassify it and get it out there in that rapid sense that you're trying to achieve?
The process in place today is where we know we need to give some work. By definition today, when we find indications of a threat, we see planning to execute a particular operation, or we see the operation being executed, because we've learned about it in a classified way, we treat it as classified. In reality, when activity is being seen on the wire, there's an alibi for how we might know about it. So we need to begin thinking thoughtfully to say, we may know about it in a classified way. If there are ways that we can find that demonstrate this activity that don't come from classified sources, that helps us quickly declassify. Or are there entities who may know about it, but they may not necessarily have connected the various dots? And that's why work with the private sector is such a requirement of being effective today in cybersecurity, because we all see pieces of the puzzle, whether it's the infrastructure, whether it's the TTP, whether it's the intent. Who's an adversary, who is an actor who's interested in that particular intellectual property, who's interested in degrading that particular communication or mission? Putting those puzzle pieces together quickly enough to prevent it from happening is very important. So what we're looking to do is take the insights we have, work very closely with the private sector to understand the puzzle pieces they have, determine are there alibis for what we know, quickly declassify that to prevent an incident from actually happening.
So on the private sector side, that relationship, how do you see that improving? What are the parts for info sharing that need to improve with that regard?
We've worked very closely with the private sector for a very long time. And what really, a lot of that change is internally on our end, as I noted earlier, to create the processes that allow us to do rapid declassification and to understand who it is most useful to. When we push out information and we don't necessarily know who's using it and what they've accomplished from a cybersecurity perspective, we can actually measure how much we're driving down cybersecurity risk. So the question we're looking to ask ourselves is, what have we done to actually drive down cybersecurity risk to the nation's critical sensitive networks, the national security systems that we're accountable for in that way? And the process of understanding who the network owner is, hearing from them how they've used this information, what would be more useful, is the key process we need to work through so we can do more of what's useful, less of what's not, but ultimately have a better understanding of what is the risk from particular adversary TTPs in a given sensitive critical national network, and then what we've done to prevent. You know, people often say, hey, Anne, will your team help on incident management? And I say, if the FBI asks us or if DHS asks us, we'll be happy to support. However, respectfully, I think we'd like to ask a different question, which is, what have we done to prevent the incident in the first place? Have we used threat intelligence? Have we used security guidelines? Have we used engagement, actually working with the network owner to give them the insights they can do to raise the level of assurance to prevent that incident from happening in the first place?
So you also talked about standards as part of some mission of the new directorate. How does your relationship with NIST factor into that? Obviously, if you're talking about standards in the government, you're going to talk about NIST. So I'm wondering how the relationship is going to look moving forward.
NIST has been one of NSA's closest partners. I personally worked on a number of efforts with NIST back in the 2010 timeframe that led to significant security improvements in firmware. And those were great examples of where bringing the security expertise and the threat insights from the agency together with NIST's amazing security expertise and standards expertise really accomplished great things in addressing a key firmware threat at the time. Working very closely with companies to also understand what was already implemented in their products and how to ensure the standard was the right leap that was implementable at that moment in time. So we're currently working with NIST on, for example, quantum-resistant crypto standards and working to share our insights with them. So key partner has always been, and we will continue to be.
So you've reached initial operating capacity, and come January, I believe, is when you will reach fully operational. What will be different from now up until the point in January we become fully operational?
So, when John Nakasone said he was calling for initial operating capacity capability to be on October 1st, he said, "Anne, it's okay. I'll let you define what that means." I said, "Thank you, bless the Lord." So that essentially meant that we're bringing together 4 internal organizations at NSA, and then we've defined, as I noted, working those key priorities. We've defined an organizational structure, and we've selected key leaders in that way. But over the next months, we need to build the internal processes, like I said, to integrate that threat intelligence, security engineering, to focus ourselves on, for example, cloud security standards. We get a lot of questions from enterprises who want to use cloud. And their question to us is, how do we use it safely? And we say, great question. Cloud is really compelling, but it brings together some of the security risks of the old model with some of the unique virtualization and other isolation need risks of the cloud model, and you need to go in eyes wide open. But we want to do more to actually document that and release it in a way that's useful for enterprises. So that's the kind of work we're doing internally now to focus ourselves, reach out to our key government partners, key international and other partners, and make some progress against the key goals. So you'll ask me that question in January, and I'll be really proud to talk about some of the great work our team's doing.
Yeah, and I would love to know, how will you measure success a year from now if we ask you back on stage to hear about all the things that you've done in the past year and how you measure success? What does that look like?
I would say 3 things. One is, for national security systems, weapon systems networks, first of all, we'll have talked to those weapon systems owners and we'll have said, have we made a difference in your cybersecurity? Because of the threat intel we've shared, the security guidance we've worked, the way we've partnered to measurably raise the level of assurance, lower the level of risk in your platforms. Our partnership with the Department of Homeland Security on critical infrastructure, Chris and I have talked about a model we'd like to build out in that way. We know we need to do critical work. We'll be meeting with our teams to start baking that in with regard to how we bring together our insights to address critical infrastructure systems needs. And then finally, as I mentioned, in our key priority future technology needs, 5G, IoT, distributed ledger, cloud, and really quantum-resistant crypto, what work have we done? And there's a lot that we're starting and already have underway. What work have we done to ensure that there are security standards in place? And where can we use incentives to incentivize those actually being implemented? Because in many cases, cybersecurity today is a leadership issue, right? In some cases, like in IoT, we know the standards exist. They're largely not implemented, and we all know the risks. So how can we use the force of NSA's insights, DOD procurement to help those become implemented, to really address some of the risks we see coming, but haven't as a community made enough progress against?
And how do you prioritize those risks? And which one of those that you mentioned, the 5G, IoT, thank you for saying distributed ledger, not blockchain. I will say it for once and once only. How do you prioritize where the risk is and where the concentration is?
So those are the technologies we first prioritize. Where we're really focused on is where we see our key critical networks wanting to use those technologies. So I mentioned an example. If a given service wants to use distributed ledger to track its supply chain, that will be the use case we'll use to say, what's the appropriate level of security needed, and then how do they actually implement that? So we're using we pick the technologies we think are the game changers in terms of use and in terms of a need to address, and then we're working with our key, we call them customers, our key, whether DOD, national security systems, with DHS, critical infrastructure, to say, how do you want to use those? And then let's build secure use cases. Let's understand what the technology needs to change to make it usable from a security perspective and work from there.
So finally, in the last couple seconds that we have here, if I'm out in the crowd and everything that you're saying sounds really, really interesting and I want to get involved, how do we reach out to the Cybersecurity Directorate in order to get involved and help the mission?
Thanks for the question, Greg. So a shout out to CSD's really amazing strategic communications team. NSA, the Cybersecurity Directorate, we have a web presence. We have a presence on Twitter, Instagram, which my 17-year-old son finds a combination of cool and unnerving. And what we're really looking to do is use that environment to get out. You saw the dual seal guidance, to really get out information. The key thing that's most helpful is tell us if it's useful. Tell us if it helps you. This is a cybersecurity community. Tell us if you can use it. what would be more useful, what you need us to do to ensure that working together, we can make a difference from a cybersecurity perspective. We see what adversaries are accomplishing. We know that's not what's right for the country. As partners, critique what we're doing and give us ideas of what would be most useful.
Great. And really intriguing stuff. Looking forward to what's coming from the Directorate in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A pleasure to be here.